Sempronius Densus went down in Roman history as one of the bravest and most loyal soldiers, all because he single-handedly protected the emperor against the Praetorian Guard, and it is about him that we will talk in today's video. The only information about this centurion comes from Tacitus, Plutarch, and Cassius Dio. According to what they wrote, Sempronius was a centurion of the Praetorian Guard in the 1st century, and worked as a bodyguard for the Emperor Galba. In 69 AD, Galba was old and needed to choose someone to succeed him on the throne. Otho, who had supported him as emperor when Nero died, hoped that Galba would return the favor. But that did not happen. In early 69, on January 10th, Galba named the young Piso Licinianus as heir to the throne. From that moment on, the choleric Otho decided to usurp the throne and kill Galba and Piso. He put the plan into action by bribing the Praetorian Guard soon after Piso's appointment. On January 15th, just 5 days after Piso was chosen by Galba, Otho used the support and protection of the Praetorian Guard to proclaim himself emperor. The Praetorians, who were supposed to protect Galba, now wanted to kill him and his successor. On this day, Galba and Piso were being carried through the streets when a large group of Praetorians appeared to assassinate them. Sempronius, who always protected the emperor, made a difficult decision. He noticed that all the soldiers around him decided to support the conspirators, but Sempronius remained loyal to Galba and Piso. He was pressured to change sides, but said no before the conspiracy. And at the same time, he tried to convince the Praetorians to forego the assassination, but to no avail. Plutarch wrote this about Sempronius's attitude. No man resisted or offered to defend Galba except Sempronius Densus, the only one among thousands of men whom the sun on that day saw act worthily in the Roman Empire. Though he had never received any favor from Galba, he defended the progeny through bravery and loyalty. As Piso fled, Sempronius, with no way out, began to fight his former colleagues alone. Plutarch narrated the details of the episode. First, raising his vine staff, with which centurions punish soldiers, he called out loudly to the aggressors, ordering them not to touch the emperor. And when they charged him point blank, he drew his sword and defended himself for a long time, until finally he fell butchered on his knees and tumbled to the ground. Sempronius, fighting only with his dagger, could not hold out for long. When he fell to the ground, the Praetorians brutally killed Galba and then Piso, who had hidden himself in a temple. Otho became emperor and ruled Rome for only 3 months. In April AD 69, Vitellius became emperor, ordering the execution of all the participants in the murder of Galba, Piso, and Sempronius. Sempronius's heroic act left a legacy of courage and loyalty for the Romans. For this reason, the Roman historian Cassius Dio describes him as most worthy of mention. Marcus Cassius Scavus is known for being one of Julius Caesar's greatest centurions during the civil wars in the 1st century BC. Scavus impressed Julius Caesar by his bravery and loyalty when, even though he lost an eye and was brutally wounded, he continued to push forward against the legions of Pompey the Great. Let's look further into the story of this brave centurion. We know very little about Scavus's life before he decided to enlist in the Roman army. During the wars in Gaul, he served alongside Julius Caesar as a common legionary and was at the forefront of the legions sent to fight in Britannia in 55 BC. When Scavus and other legionaries landed on the beach of the Britons, apparently everything seemed peaceful. Caesar ordered him to stand guard on the ship while the others set up camp. A short time later, some Bretons appeared to attack Scavus, throwing darts at him. The legionary managed to defend himself with his shield, but the Bretons surrounded him for a face-to-face fight. Even alone against a large number of opponents, Scavus fought with enormous courage and skill, defeating several Bretons and holding out for a long time. He managed to escape the fight, but left behind much of his armor, which had been torn from him. On the way to the camp, Scavus, besides being wounded, was worried that he would be punished by the general for leaving behind his helmet and shield. He managed to find Caesar and apologized for what had happened. Caesar, instead of punishing him, was impressed by his courage and promoted him to Centurion. From that moment on, Marcus Cassius Scaevus became an example of bravery to be followed by Caesar's legionaries and was chosen to command his own centuria. 7 years later, Rome was plunged into a civil war between the two most powerful generals of the Republic, Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. In the year 48 BC, at the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar defeated Pompey's forces, forcing him to flee to Dyrrhachium, a city on the Adriatic coast, where he tried to reorganize the legions to face Caesar's army again. Pompey built his headquarters there and fortified the city with a complex system of trenches and walls. During this period, several of Caesar's high-ranking centurions were wounded, and Marcus Cassius Scaevus was chosen to command a cohort of the 6th Legion with about 500 soldiers. According to the Roman historian Suetonius, this cohort had been selected to defend a stronghold. Knowing this, Pompey sent an entire legion with 6,000 men to confront Scaevus's cohort. Julius Caesar's soldiers were at a 1 to 12 disadvantage. The fear was too much, and they thought about giving up. But Marcus Cassius Scaevus, who already had experience fighting at a numerical disadvantage, encouraged his men not to give up and face Pompey's army. The soldiers decided to fight. The battle was intense. Scaevus defeated several enemy soldiers with his sword alone, but he also sustained several blows. An arrow wounded his left eye, blinding him. Suetonius narrated Scaevus's situation. Blinded in one eye, wounded in the thigh and shoulder, with no less than 120 holes in his shield. Pompey's troops fired about 3,000 arrows during the battle, but that didn't make the centurion give up. Removing the arrow from his eye, Marcus Cassius Scaevus ordered his soldiers not to retreat and continued to fight with even more courage. A few minutes later, the centurion collapsed. So much was the blood loss. The historian Plutarch described what happened. Scaevus called out to the enemy, as if to surrender. 2 soldiers from Pompey's legion went to the scene, but Scaevus cut the shoulder of one with his sword, wounded the other in the face, and then fled with his soldiers' help. Julius Caesar, upon learning of this, promoted Scaevus again, this time as Primus Pilus, the highest centurion rank in the legion, and Caesar did not make him serve in just any legion, but his favorite, the 10th Legion Equestris. Scaevus received a reward worth 200,000 sestertii, and his salary was increased 3 times. Marcus Cassius Scaevus's story became an inspiration for many Roman soldiers over the centuries. He was seen as an example of bravery and loyalty, even if he was at a disadvantage.
Using innovative tactics and strategies for the time, Rome became one of history's greatest empires. In large part, this was due to the strategic expertise of its generals, who were the driving force behind such military success. They were responsible for expanding the Republic and the Empire through war, greatly increasing the number of Roman provinces. In this video, we will look at 10 of the greatest generals of the Roman army and their major achievements. Known as one of the greatest generals and strategists in history, Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus won many epic battles in the Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC. But his greatest victory was certainly at the Battle of Zama, when he defeated the Carthaginian general Hannibal. Scipio traveled with his army to the village of Zama, the location of the Carthaginian troops' camp. In the battle that occurred on October 19, 202 BC, Scipio was outnumbered. He had a modest army and cavalry advantage, but Hannibal had veterans from the entire Italian campaign and 80 war elephants. The battle began when Hannibal used the elephants to tear apart the Roman front line, but Scipio was a good strategist and trained his soldiers to handle the animals. He organized his men into vertical columns with paths in the middle, set traps on the ground, and had them blow trumpets to scare the elephants away. Some elephants fell into the ground openings, others were forced to turn back toward the Carthaginian soldiers. Hannibal's strategy failed, and after a bloody and time-consuming battle, the Romans won. After the defeat, the Carthaginian Senate signed a surrender agreement, ending a war that lasted almost 20 years. With the victory, Rome secured control of the western Mediterranean, began annexing the Iberian Peninsula, and established alliances in North Africa. Marius is considered responsible for several actions that had considerable influence on the transformation of Roman civilization from republic to empire. He allowed landless Romans to join the army. Before that, they were required to own property. At the same time, he changed the law so that Romans had to carry their own equipment. These became known as Marius's mules. He was also consul-elect 7 times, something unprecedented from 107 BC. However, the office became increasingly autocratic. The election had to do with granting emergency powers to fight invading hordes than with enforcing the constitution. Marius also distinguished himself as a shrewd general in several campaigns, especially in Africa and against German tribes. He defeated the Teutons as they advanced towards Italy. This tribe had engineered a 2-pronged attack together with the Germanic tribe, the Cimbri, from their positions in Gaul. He ambushed the hordes near the Alps and killed about 100,000 invaders. Despite being born poor, Sulla achieved a renowned position in the Roman army and was an essential piece in the victory of the Jugurthine War. Jugurtha, chief of the Numidians, had defied Roman decree when he invaded Numidia for his own royal family. Rome retaliated, defeating the leader and forcing him into exile in Mauretania. Sulla made a deal with Bocchus, king of Mauretania, who handed Jugurtha over to the Romans. The war ended without bloodshed, and for this, he was praised in the Senate. He then fought alongside Marius against the Cimbri and Teutonic invaders, before taking political office. He was even consul after his efforts as a general during the Social War of 91 to 88 BC. Sulla became the first general to march on Rome in response to Marius, causing him to dismiss him from his position. Although several of his commanders refused to follow him, he forced Marius out of the city. However, the latter returned later and resumed power while Sulla was campaigning in Asia. In 82 BC, Sulla marched on Rome for the second time. The Senate appointed him dictator, giving him almost unlimited power. With a wealthy provincial background, Magnus, or Pompey the Great, was one of the main leaders in the last decades of the Roman Republic and Rome's most famous general during its twilight. He first entered politics when he used his troops to help Sulla liberate Rome from the Marians in 83 BC. With that victory, he received the epithet Teenage Butcher. Later, when pirates began threatening Rome's wheat supply in 67 BC, Pompey led 120,000 soldiers and 500 ships. Dividing the Mediterranean into 12 zones, he solved the problem in 3 months. Pompey subsequently formed an alliance known as the First Roman Triumvirate, along with Julius Caesar and Crassus. He married Caesar's daughter, Julia, to consolidate the alliance. However, when Julia died in 54 BC, Pompey and Caesar clashed, which degenerated into civil war. Caesar won and Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was killed. He is probably the most famous of all the Romans. As a politician, Caesar was the first emperor in everything but name. After the conquest of Gaul, which extended Rome's territory to the English Channel and the Rhine, he was the first Roman general to cross both channels. He built a bridge across the Rhine and led the first raid into Britannia. These conquests gave Caesar unparalleled military power, overshadowing even Pompey and the Senate. Pompey accused Caesar of insubordination and treason, ordering him to disband his army and return to Rome. Caesar refused. In 49 BC, he led his army into civil war and won. As dictator in Rome, Caesar revised the calendar, began building a basilica, and issued a new coin with his face on it. He was assassinated in 44 BC. His death precipitated the end of the Roman Republic. Considered by many the greatest Roman general, Mark Antony began his career as an officer in Egypt. Between 54 to 50 BC, he served Julius Caesar, becoming one of his most trusted officers. After Caesar's assassination, Antony became the leader of Rome. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, was his main rival. Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate. Antony controlled the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and Octavian controlled most of the west. Antony married Octavian's sister, Octavia, but later had Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, as his mistress and wife. This caused him to lose his alliance with Rome. When war broke out between the two men, Antony was defeated. He and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, where they committed suicide. Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Since childhood, he had been a close friend of the first emperor, Octavian Augustus. Octavian and Agrippa were cavalry officers under Caesar at the Battle of Munda in 45 BC. After this quarrel and return to Rome, Caesar adopted Octavian as his legal heir. As the senatorial factions in Rome became increasingly aggressive, Caesar sent Octavian and Agrippa to study in Apollonia with the Macedonian legions. Agrippa earned a great reputation among the Macedonian legionaries and exhibited remarkable leadership skills. In Greece, he also worked with architecture, acquiring skills he would later use. In addition to being Octavian's chief military advisor, Agrippa was the general of the Roman Empire's ship fleet and responsible for building the Portus Julius harbor, joining the lakes Lucrine and Avernus. This allowed Rome's ships to be defended from the attack of Sextus Pompey. Agrippa and Octavian fought together in many land and sea battles throughout the empire, including Gaul, Germania, and probably Africa. Agrippa was known for his civic duties and military prowess. He was responsible for coordinating repairs and improvements to Rome's waterworks, renovating and extending the Aqua Marcia aqueduct, and hauling water to new parts of the city. When Augustus came to power, Agrippa worked alongside the emperor, repairing streets and buildings, also organizing festivals for the inhabitants of Rome. Later, Augustus paid an indirect compliment to Agrippa. "I found Rome a city of bricks, but I left it a city of marble." Germanicus was an important member of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and one of the most renowned generals of the early years of the Roman Empire, particularly for his campaigns in Germania. The son of Nero Claudius Drusus, the name Germanicus was added in 9 BC by his father after his victories in Germania. In 4 AD, Germanicus was adopted by his paternal uncle, Tiberius, Augustus's successor as emperor. He was appointed commander of the forces in Germania in 14 AD after Augustus's death. After suppressing a rebellion among the 8 legions he commanded, he marched to the Teutoburg forest, scene of a battle in 9 AD. At this site, he buried the bones of the fallen Roman soldiers before pursuing the Cherusci tribe, killing many in revenge. In 16 AD, he again proved his strategic skill when he encountered a German alliance at the Battle of the Weser River. Thousands of German troops were killed. The Romans had few casualties. Agricola was the general who conquered Britannia, not just parts, but all of it. He fought battles throughout the territory and, as eventual governor, built 1,300 miles of roads and at least 60 forts. After holding office in Rome, Emperor Vespasian sent Agricola to serve in Britannia as a commander. Later, while governor, he was ordered to conquer the entire island. Leading the army toward northern Scotland, Agricola built forts across much of the lowlands and introduced Romanization measures, encouraging communities to build towns on the Roman model, and educating the children of the native nobility in the Roman manner. He also instructed the leader of the fleet in northern Britannia to sail up the northern coast, confirming it for the first time that Britannia was an island. Agricola was called to Britannia again in 85 AD. Rumor had it that the Emperor Domitian was jealous of his success. Also known as Drusus the Elder, he was a Roman politician and military commander. He was also responsible for the first major Roman campaigns beyond the Rhine River and the initiator of the conquest of Germania. He was the first Roman general to reach the Weser and Elbe rivers. Brother of Tiberius, who became emperor, Drusus was the son of the Emperor Augustus, although legally his father was Tiberius Claudius Nero. This rumor was fueled by Drusus, as it made him part of Augustus's direct lineage. Drusus's military prowess was evident during his incursions into Germania. In 12 BC, Drusus led a victorious campaign in the region and subdued the Sicambri. Later that year, he led a naval campaign against the Germanic tribes of the North Sea coast, conquering the Batavi and Frisians. He also defeated the Chauci near the mouth of the Weser. In 11 BC, Drusus conquered the Eusippides and the Marsi, extending Roman control to the upper Weser. In 9 BC, while consul, Drusus conquered the Mattiaci, and later defeated the Marcomanni and the Etrusci. That same year, while returning after reaching the Elbe River, Drusus fell off his horse, was severely injured, and died a month later. He was only 29 years old. Drusus remained extremely popular with the legionnaires, who erected a monument known today as the Drusus Stone in his honor. His family received the name Germanicus as a hereditary honorary title, passed on to his eldest son.
Before we talk about them, we need to understand what the life of a Roman army veteran was like. On average, a soldier's length of service until he was discharged depended on the military force he was part of, and changed slightly over the centuries. Generally, a legionary soldier served 20 years, a Praetorian guard served 16, and an auxiliary soldier served about 25 years. Those service lengths may seem short today, especially when some people spend 35 years in a military career. But the average life expectancy in the ancient world was much shorter than today. 20 years spent in the legions represented a much larger portion of a man's life than we can imagine. If the serviceman served his full term and received an honorable discharge, his civilian life was usually pretty good. Veterans had a high status in ancient Rome and were protected by laws that gave them specific rights and immunities, and they could even become local decurions, a kind of councilman receiving land grants. If they received an honorable discharge, veterans would also earn money in addition to land. A legionary received 30,000 denarii, which could rise to 5,000. A praetorian could receive between 5,000 and 8,250 denarii. Now that we know more about veteran soldiers, let's talk about the evocati, who were also veterans, but with more status and some particularities. In short, an evocatus was a soldier who, after having remarkably fulfilled his period in the Roman imperial army, was dismissed with honors and accolades, and later decided to return to active service. To give you an idea of how respected they were, these veterans were often leaders in colonies throughout the empire, and there was usually peace and security where they settled. In turn, this attracted other civilians, as veterans also represented a skilled labor force locally, as well as being very good for the local economy. One example of a thriving veteran colony on the outskirts of the empire was Thamugari in Numidia, a short distance from the legionary fortress of Lambaesis. Another factor that made the evocati highly effective, and that led to them being called back into service, was that they formed a kind of ready and trained militia for emergencies. They were much better options than conventional recruits. One example occurred during the Boudica uprising in 60 AD, when Governor Suetonius Paulinus summoned 2,500 evocati. Tacitus wrote this about the event: "The old soldiers experienced in battle yearned to throw the darts, and Suetonius confidently gave the signal to begin the battle." Additionally, the evocati reported directly to the governor of a Roman province. In times of emergency, they could be used to reinforce the garrison. Another reason a man might join the evocati was the need for money if he was going through hard times, or the urge to find a purpose for life after leaving the army. Just like today, it was not easy for a career soldier to rejoin civilian society. Many saw with delight the opportunity to return to the ranks of the imperial army and undergo new adventures in distant lands. Finally, men who were called back into service by the consul or former commander also became evocati. This situation often occurred during the civil wars. For example, at the Battle of Pharsalus, Pompey used 2,000 evocati against Caesar, and later Octavian enlisted 3,000 evocati to face Mark Antony. In 67 AD, Gaius Licinius Mucianus, the governor of Syria, claimed to have recruited 13,000 evocati to fight the Emperor Vitellius. Another clear example of how the evocati had a very lofty status in the imperial army was that they never performed tasks deemed low-level, or that were usually done by low-ranking military personnel. For example, fortifying the camp, digging roads, standing watch, and other less complex tasks. The evocati were too precious for ordinary tasks and were allocated elsewhere. In addition to when needed, evocati fulfilled other roles. They became instructors, standard bearers, and physical trainers for the regular troops. Many evocati also returned to the military ranks to become qualified and skilled officers or administrators in the legions. Some joined Rome's police and fire departments. Others were army surveyors, architects, and quartermasters. The skilled and high-ranking evocati often came from the Praetorian Guard, although sometimes they were drawn from the regular legions. In some cases, they held very high positions in the army, even above ordinary legionary soldiers. Some evocati were even equated with the renowned Centurions. These soldiers were also often promoted to the rank of Centurion, and were given permission to carry a vine staff, with which they punished soldiers who had committed acts of indiscipline, proving how respected and admired they were. There was always a substantial number of evocati in each relevant imperial legion. When the commander of that legion was popular among the soldiers, the number of veterans joining the banner naturally increased. The name evocati was also applied to a select group of young men of the equestrian order, appointed by the Emperor Domitian to guard his quarter. Some writers believe that this corpus existed under successive emperors, composed of those renowned as evocati Augusti, which might be translated to imperial evocati. These evocati served 16 years as members of the Praetorian Guard, and were the only evocati allowed to use the adjective Augusti, imperial. Unlike the regular evocati, the evocati Augusti were apparently chosen judiciously by the emperor. And that is the story of these amazing military men.
When a legionnaire joined the Roman army, he worked for almost 25 years. The question was how to stay alive for so long. What happened to a Roman legionnaire who was injured or became too ill to serve? How were they treated? And did the government give them any benefits or pensions? Stay with us, because that's what our video today is about. Concerned about the health and well-being of his soldiers, Emperor Augustus was the first to establish medical units for his army. He gave each legion doctors, support teams, and hospitals with a capacity of up to 500 soldiers. These experts remained close to headquarters and were ready to help wounded soldiers who arrived on horseback at headquarters. These doctors and other medical professionals were highly skilled. They could save up to 70% of the wounded and make the army function better. But what would happen if doctors did not know if a soldier could resume his duty? During the Republic, the laws of Appius Saturninus and Lucius Flavius ensured that soldiers who had conquered land in battle could keep it when they retired. For example, Caesar's soldiers who took Gaul kept their land there, but they seldom got any kind of cash benefit until the Emperor Augustus devised benefits for retired or disabled soldiers. Augustus created a huge pension fund worth 170 million sesterces, to which allies and imperial cities donated money. Sometime later, to ensure that all soldiers received this benefit, 5% inherent taxes and 1% on goods sold at auction were instituted to pay into a fund for the soldiers. 3 military prefects were responsible for it. This is how the scheme worked. After 25 years of service, a soldier would receive 12,000 sesterces or 3,000 denarii, about 20,000 USD. This was called honesta missio and was a kind of proof that the soldier had done his job properly. But depending on the rank, these amounts could be much higher. For example, a centurion could receive up to 600,000 sesterces. But the situation was a little different for the disabled soldier. For his good work, he would receive the missio causaria, different from the honesta missio, proving that he had performed honorably. The disabled soldier would receive a different amount. If he had served for 12 years and then got injured, he would get 50% of what a normal retired soldier would, which in this case would be 1,500 denarii. But it is important to note that the soldier had to be examined by 3 doctors to get this benefit. If it was proven that he was disabled, the missio causaria would give him enough money to live for the rest of his life in peace. A soldier who received the missio causaria would also be granted small but valuable land parcels, the right to a military will made during his service, which remained valid for 1 year, and could be given to any Roman citizen, and the peculium castrense right, which allowed the soldier to hand his money and goods earned during his military service to a slave or son. Higher-ranking officers, such as the primus pilus centurions, also had access to a benefit that was not part of the public fund. It was a sort of private scheme managed by brokers for certain companies, giving these military personnel large amounts of money each year. A commander could also call a retired soldier back into service who had performed greatly in the army to serve as a member of the evocati, the best of the Roman veterans. Depending on the soldier's intelligence and education, he would work in administrative roles if he was incapacitated. This meant that, even if the soldier had serious physical problems, he still couldn't help the Roman army. Oddly, although the Romans lived in a society that seems ancient and not that civilized by today's standards, they knew long ago how important it was to take care of their brave soldiers, who risked their lives for Rome for many years. In the last centuries of the Roman Empire, some leaders of the barbarian peoples tested their own courage in brutal confrontations with the Romans and amongst themselves. In this video, we will look at the top 8 barbarian warriors. Born into a noble family of the Germanic Cherusci tribe around 18 BC, Arminius was taken from his home by the Romans as a boy and served in the Roman army. In 9 AD, Cherusci forces ambushed and massacred 3 Roman legions under the command of Varus, governor of the province of Germania. After a humiliating defeat, in which the defeated Varus fell on his own sword, the Romans withdrew and did not attempt further invasions again. Although Arminius was hailed as a nationalist hero during the unification of Germany in the late 19th century, his reputation was tarnished at the beginning of World War II, when modern Germans associated his historical feats with the nationalism of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. Number 7. Boudica. Like other Celtic women, Boudica had greater freedom than many other women in the ancient world. She trained her fighting skills and use of weapons alongside the men of her tribe. In 60 AD, when her husband, King Prasutagus of the Iceni people, died without leaving any male heirs, the Romans took the opportunity to annex the kingdom, publicly flog Boudica, and rape 2 of her daughters. As governor of the Roman province, Gaius Paulinus was absent from the region. Queen Boudica led a rebellion with the Iceni people and other tribes, achieving victory over the Roman 9th Legion. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, Boudica's forces massacred about 70,000 Romans. Number 6. Alaric I. One of the most famous barbarian leaders, the Gothic king Alaric I rose to power after the death of the Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius II in 395 AD, destroying the fragile peace between Rome and the Goths. When the Western Emperor, Flavius Honorius, refused to provide land and supplies to Alaric's troops in 408, Gothic forces besieged Rome. In the summer of 410, a group of rebel slaves opened the Porta Salaria, and Alaric's troops were the first foreign enemy to enter the city in about 800 years. They sacked Rome for 3 days, but treated the city's inhabitants humanely. Alaric died soon after they left, during a subsequent expedition to Africa. His descendants, the Visigoths, migrated to the Iberian Peninsula and settled in present-day Spain. Number 5. Attila the Hun. Born into a royal family of Huns, nomadic people who lived in present-day Hungary, Attila rose to power alongside his brother, Bleda, in 434 AD. A former ally of Rome against other barbarian groups, including Burgundians and Goths, Attila accepted large subsidies in gold in exchange for not attacking Roman territory. But he did it anyway. After killing Bleda, he took full control of an empire that stretched across Central Europe. Several complicated episodes, involving the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III and his sister Honoria, inspired Attila to invade Gaul, now France, in 450. Although a force of Romans and Visigoths blocked the invasion, Attila was undeterred. In 452, he invaded Italy. The Romans sent Pope Leo I as a peace emissary, and, although the details of the meeting are unknown, Attila withdrew his troops and returned to Hungary. In 453, he was found dead the morning after his wedding, apparently a victim of a fatal nosebleed. The motive may have been accidental alcohol poisoning, or an assassination plot, possibly involving his fiancée.
Number 4. Gaiseric. When the Vandal king Gaiseric rose to power in 428, he led some 80,000 men to North Africa, where they established a kingdom that controlled the Mediterranean Sea for the next century. When Emperor Valentinian III was assassinated, voiding a treaty that promised his daughter Eudocia to Gaisaric's son, the Vandals marched on Rome in 455. Seeing that their defenses were weak, the Romans again sent Pope Leo I to beg for mercy. Thanks to the Pope's diplomacy, the Vandals agreed not to burn Rome or massacre the inhabitants in exchange for entry into the city. Later, Gaiseric returned victorious to North Africa, where he crushed 2 Roman attacks, in 461 and 468, and invaded the territories of the Eastern Empire from Alexandria, Egypt to Anatolia. Number 3. Odoacer. Most scholars agree that Odoacer, Italy's first barbarian king, was the son of Edico the Hun, king of the Germanic Sciri tribe, and advisor to the dreaded leader Attila the Hun. In 476 AD, after serving as commander of the Roman army in Italy, Odoacer led a rebellion against Orestes, a Roman general who overthrew the Western Emperor Julius Nepos, and his teenage son, Romulus Augustulus, declared emperor. Odoacer's forces captured and executed Orestes and exiled Romulus. Although he officially recognized the sovereignty of the Byzantine emperor Zeno, Orestes refused to assign Julius Nepos as Western emperor, as Zeno wanted, instead declaring himself king. He was a tolerant ruler, allowing the practice of Roman Catholicism, despite following the Arian Christian faith. Zenon's alliance with the Ostrogoth, Eastern Gothic leader Theodoric dictated the end of Odoacer's reign. When the Ostrogoths invaded Italy in 489, they captured almost the entire peninsula. Odoacer managed to hold out for some time in Ravenna, but after signing an agreement to rule the city jointly in 493, Theodoric murdered Odoacer, his family, and his followers. Number 2. Clovis. Clovis I was the first ruler of the Merovingian dynasty, which would rule Gaul and Germany between 500 and 750 AD. He is considered the founder of France. The son of Childeric, a pagan king of a Germanic tribe known as the Salian Franks, Clovis assumed the throne in 481 when he was only 15 years old. After defeating the last Roman governor of Gaul in 486, Clovis established a kingdom of various Frankish peoples between the west bank of the Rhine and the Atlantic Ocean. Clovis converted to Catholicism, and his kingdom blended Roman and Germanic cultural traditions. Much of Clovis's reign was marked by a power struggle with the young Visigoth king Alaric II. But in 507, Clovis defeated and killed his rival. From Paris, Clovis attempted the expansion of his territory, but Theodoric, the powerful Ostrogoth ruler of Italy, stopped him. Clovis died around 511. His Merovingian descendants ruled for over 200 years. 18 future French kings would have had the name Louis, a Latinized version of Clovis. Number 1. Theodoric. As a child, Theodoric was sent to Constantinople as a hostage of the Eastern Roman Empire to secure the loyalty of his father, the Ostrogoth chieftain Theodemir, by signing a Roman Gothic treaty. Although he never learned to read or write, he adopted many aspects of Roman culture. In 488 AD, Theodoric invaded Italy, conquering virtually the entire peninsula, and also Sicily in 493, when he manipulated and killed his rival Odoacer. Peace reigned in Italy during Theodoric's more than 3 decades, 33 years in power. He issued decrees to ensure fair legal treatment for Goths and Romans, stressing that the two groups should live together amicably. Far from the brutal stereotype of a barbarian king, Theodoric wore the purple robes favored by Roman emperors. After his death in 526, he was remembered as Theodoric the Great, given his peaceful and just rule and the revitalization of Italy after the fall of the Roman Empire. Dogs were extremely valued in ancient Rome and other cultures. The Roman dog especially performed tasks as hunters, guardians, and companions. But in the case of war dogs, this is an old military practice, generally used for intimidation, pursuit, combat, and tracking. In this video, we will cover the leading dog used in combat, the Canis pugnax. The term Canis pugnax refers to a breed that does not exist today. These dogs arose through the crossing of dogs of the Molossus breed of Greek origin. Being large, hairy, and heavy, they were used to protect cattle and horses. In some cases, they were also trained to hunt and fight, being referred to by Greek and Roman philosophers, poets, and playwrights. Eventually, the Greek Molossus became extinct for unknown reasons, and we do not know when this happened. But the breed gave rise to three categories: Molossus, bulldogs, and mastiffs, categories that branched out into dozens of other breeds with common traits. In view of this diversity, some breeds were used by the Romans to breed war dogs. The use of dogs in the Roman army began even in the Republic. Yes, the Romans were already breeding dogs before that to be guards, hunters, and faithful companions. But as Rome grew, the number of armed conflicts increased. The conquest of territories and assimilation of cultures, traditions, and species of animals and plants were emerging in Roman culture. The Greeks, Germans, Gauls, and other peoples already used war dogs. The Romans realized the potential of this decision, although too late. To fulfill the role of guards and fighters in the arenas, the Romans crossed different breeds of Molossus to achieve the model that suited their liking. Large dogs, about 60 centimeters tall, with a rough appearance, intimidating bark, weighing between 40 and 50 kilos, black in color, obedient, territorial, loyal, and fierce. The Roman Molossus was specially adapted for fighting purposes, being called Canis pugnax, or fighting dog. In the 4th century BC, fighting between gladiators became regular and prestigious in the Roman world. Besides fighting between men, combat with animals became frequent from a certain period of the 2nd century BC, both in hunts and in direct fighting between gladiators and animals. Wild animals such as lions, leopards, elephants, bears, and domestic animals such as bulls, horses, and dogs were used. Fights could include combat between animals only. In other cases, dogs and other animals were trained to do tricks. These animals were also used to intimidate or execute prisoners and criminals. The ferocious animals were released into the arena after being subjected to a period of fasting. Their death had to be spectacular. In many cases, there was a kind of race with bulls or rhinos, fights between animals, and also hunts, where the animals chased unarmed men who ended up torn to pieces. Much attention was paid to the scenography, which tried to recreate the natural environment of the beasts. The Canis pugnax was intended to be used in the arenas, in the deadly games between gladiators. But the Romans realized that these fighting dogs could be added to the army. As we said above, many peoples already had war dogs. In fact, as the Roman domains annexed parts of Gaul, Germania, and Britannia, the Romans learned about other dog breeds, crossing them with their own Molossus. This gave rise to new breeds of Pugnax canis. But these dogs were not mistreated at all. They were highly honored and well cared for. Often, the owner's reputation and livelihood depended on the dog's performance in a fight. Therefore, they received more care and attention than many of the slaves in Rome or some of their relatives. Sometimes, the Romans had to face war dogs in conflicts with the Germanics and Celts. In the Battle of Frachale against the Cimbri in 101 BC, they fought fierce animals. The dogs quarreled with the Romans, even when their owners were already dead or enslaved. They also defended the fortified camp at the Cimbri more effectively and for longer. The Romans were only able to storm the fortifications after killing all the animals. Sometime later, still in the 1st century BC, the use of war dogs by the Roman armies came into consideration when Julius Caesar and other generals invaded Gaul and Britannia. The Romans faced these dogs again and became more interested in their use in other military campaigns. War training was not simple. The dog had to live with the entire court, distinguish friends from enemies by smell, clothing, and armor. Smell was the dog's most important ability. Therefore, they had to socialize with and accept food from all the legionnaires of the garrison in the Castra, land used as camps or defensive positions. Dogs also had to learn verbal commands. If a stranger entered the camp with a specific order, the animal did not have to pounce on him as if facing an enemy. Dogs had to respect the order of attack in a battle, but all the various calls and the order to stop or return when needed. Unlike barbarian war dogs that attacked any foreign intervention, Roman dogs obeyed orders as if they were soldiers. The Canis pugnax was strong, combative, and brave, but also agile and fast. It could cover considerable distances daily on the plains and mountains, withstanding all kinds of weather. The Roman legions moved on foot over distances of up to 35 kilometers a day, with a heavy load on their backs. They also had to clear a large piece of land and build a castrum from scratch to spend the night. Meanwhile, dogs, as well as sentries, ensured that no one approached the camp. The construction of a Roman camp was the most dangerous time for legionnaires. In case they were being spied upon, the enemies had a good opportunity to attack them. Dismantling the castrum was also dangerous because they had to remove the tents, the altars, and the fence, pack everything, load the wagons, and feed the animals and themselves, not least because it was difficult to do this while moving. Dogs were particularly important as protection on these occasions. But the use of dogs by the Roman army was not as common as some people think. There are few accounts of dogs used on the battlefield, although there is the possibility that some authors did not give such importance to these animals. Perhaps this is why they disregarded their presence in the camps, and even though they were important in combat and guarding. Interestingly, the Greeks have more accounts of the use of war dogs than the Romans. There are even records that King Philip II of Macedon and Alexander the Great highly esteemed these animals, even serving as guard dogs. In the Roman case, reporters of the use of war dogs are scarcer. This suggests that it was not something usual in the army. Generally, poets and writers extol dogs as guard, hunting, and fighting animals in the arenas, but barely spoke of their use on the battlefield. The historian Publius Tacitus wrote the presence of the gods in camps and bases, acting as guards. Sometimes they were used to intimidate prisoners and capture fugitives, but such use in battle was not regular. Tacitus also wrote that the legions in Germania, Britannia, Dacia, and Thrace used more guard dogs than usual. During the reign of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the Romans used Pugnax canis in warfare, according to the monument dedicated to the emperor. The column of Marcus Aurelius, completed in 193 AD after the emperor's death, shows dogs used in some campaigns, but we do not know what their purpose was. Were they guard and tracking dogs, or were they used in battles? We cannot deny that dogs were an important part of Roman life and culture. They were treated as if they were family members. When they died, they were even honored with tombs and gravestones. I want to know your opinion too, so write what you think about this relationship between the ancient Romans and dogs, in addition to their use in combat and in guarding the legionaries.
When an authority must travel anywhere in the modern world, he takes his bodyguards with him. In Roman times, emperors and other authorities did not go anywhere without theirs, the lictors. The word lictor derives from the Etruscans, a people who lived on the Italian peninsula and occupied territories that would later be occupied by the Romans. It was from these people that the Romans drew inspiration for their lictors. According to the Roman historian Titus Livius, the first lictors were selected by the mythical Romulus, who designated 12 people to conduct this prestigious duty. However, there is no agreement on why exactly 12 people were chosen. According to one theory, Romulus appointed this number because a priest who analyzed dreams and created omens saw 12 birds in his vision depicting Romulus's future dominion, implying that this was a sign of his ascension. Titus Livius, on the other hand, disagrees, pointing out that Romulus was most likely directly influenced by the Etruscans, who had a candidate for each of their 12 states. To become a lictor, a person had to be a figure of integrity, and, at the very least, a free Roman with high physical skills. On most occasions, they were appointed by a soldier or a reputable figure in the state. However, most lictors were selected directly by the powers they were to protect, ensuring that only individuals trusted by that person oversaw their protection. In Rome, lictors wore a toga. Outside the city, they wore a red military garb, the sagum. At funerals, they wore black robes. Their salary varied depending on the authority they protected or their rank, but it was usually around 600 sesterces. The lictors oversaw protecting all Roman authorities who held the imperium, such as senators, magistrates, or consuls. They were allowed to use sticks adorned with fasces, which were tied bundles of wooden rods, and axes when they were outside the pomerium, which was Rome's symbolic border. They were to follow their lord wherever he went, keeping him safe at home, in the streets, in public baths, or in the forum, remaining by his side whenever he went to places with crowds or potential commotions. An authority could only dispense with his lictors when addressing a higher authority, or visiting a free city. On these occasions, the lictors formed an orderly line in front of their master, with the most important lictor, known as a proximus or primus, organizing the advances. It was their mission to keep danger away from their master in the case of riots or huge crowds. They had plenty of power to do so, having the right to punish and arrest Roman people if their master ordered it. The number of lictors assigned to an authority was determined by its power and size. A dictator like Julius Caesar could have up to 24 lictors, whilst a consul or proconsul could have 12 or 6. During the imperial period, however, emperors were escorted by 12 lictors, a number that was doubled later in Domitian's reign, when he prescribed the number of 24 lictors to protect emperors. In extraordinary circumstances, lictors could follow famous persons who were not members of the Roman state to special occasions such as funerals. Despite their prominence, several organizations eventually lost a lot of authority or were extinct during the late Roman Empire, when the mechanisms of its monarchy were already eroding, such as the Praetorians and the lictors, who were both summarily eradicated. Even after their demise, these warriors managed to immortalize their name in history, guaranteeing that they will be regarded as one of the great symbols of the might and grandeur of the ancient Roman leaders. When Augustus established the Praetorian Guard, he feared that it would concentrate too much authority. As a result, the organization that would help to balance the balance of Roman power was born, the urban cohorts, which is the focus of our video today. It is unknown when the urban cohorts were formed, but it is widely assumed that they were assembled in the final years of Augustus's reign. It is said that he formed 3 cohorts, the first of which were drawn from the Praetorian Guard, but this was not the only connection with the latter. There were 9 Praetorian Guard cohorts. When the urban cohorts were formed, they were given the numerals X, XI, and XII, which they maintained even after organizational structure expansions. The command of the urban cohorts was exercised by the Praefectus Urbi, an urban prefect whose power was greater than that of the Praetorian leaders. Their organization was deeply hierarchical, with each cohort commanded by a tribune and 6 centurions. They had jurisprudence on all criminal matters that happened in Rome and the Italian peninsula, which gave these men a great deal of influence, particularly when the emperors were at war. Because the goal behind the urban cohorts was to balance power in Rome, it was critical that their members be devoted fighters. Most of its members were recruited from the Italian peninsula, a location where the most loyal men were thought to be found. Once recruited, they would serve in the military for up to 20 years, fighting in battles, suppressing revolts, or, as was customary, taking sides in civil conflicts. Members of the urban cohorts, however, had advantages in addition to their commitments. Aside from holding positions of great prestige in the Roman state, their pay was quite good, being 50% greater than that of a traditional legionnaire. According to the historian Suetonius, following Augustus's death, one of his desires in his will was that each member of the Roman cohorts be paid 500 sesterces, showing how high their wages were. Because the members of the urban cohorts came from the Praetorian Guard, they had an awfully close relationship with this other group. so close that, for a long time, they shared the same barracks, the Castra Praetoria. But as their relevance increased, and with the desire to gain more independence from the Praetorians, the urban cohorts were given their own camp in Rome, by order of Emperor Aurelian in 270. Because the men of the urban cohorts were not active members of the army, their primary responsibilities were to maintain Rome's urban order. Also, because their jobs were not fully established, they were ready to carry out the most different tasks. Among them were fighting minor crimes, such as thefts or acts of violence, with an impact on the preservation of the general welfare of the people, as well as crowd control at large events, such as gladiator fights at the Colosseum and massive chariot races held at the Circus Maximus. In the years that followed, urban cohorts, like the Praetorians, grew in authority, allowing its members to become increasingly involved in empire politics. After Caligula's death, they allied with Claudius, who had earned the allegiance of the Praetorian Guard, allowing them to grow in the following decades. They were then restructured into 7 cohorts of 500 men under Nero, and 4 cohorts of 1,000 men under Vitellius. However, under Vespasian's rule, who considered that Rome was already overburdened with troops, 2 urban cohorts were moved, one to Carthage and the other to Lugdunum. Their final expansion, which was more of a structural change, occurred during the reign of Emperor Septimius Severus, who redesigned the urban cohorts, maintaining only 4, each with 1,500 men. However, after supporting Marcus Maxentius against Constantine I at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, they were defeated, allowing their influence to be extinguished, as well as that of the Praetorians, whose influence was officially ended after this clash. It was the end of centuries of power and influence of the urban cohorts. Curiosity. They were powerful, dangerous, and frequently treacherous. As a result, our video today will be on the Castra Praetoria, the famed guard's headquarters. According to the records left by the historian Tacitus, one of the most prominent figures when it comes to the history of Rome, the construction of a barracks for the Praetorian troops, began in the year 23 AD, when Emperor Tiberius's friend and confidant, Lucius Aelius Sejanus, convinced the emperor that it was critical that a structure be built to consolidate the Praetorians' capabilities. The Castra Praetoria, the first important Roman brick structure, was built on the Viminal Hill, one of the 7 hills where Rome was established, between Via Nomentana and Via Tiburtina. Its territory was 440 by 380 meters, or 17 hectares, and included an area for troops to exercise, as well as various sites where camps were built. Its structure and construction measures were strictly based on the rules allegedly dictated by Hyginus Grammaticus in De Munitionibus Castrorum, which translates as "on the fortifications of a military camp." However, it is worth noting that there is much debate about who wrote this work. Regardless, the Praetorian barracks were built with sturdy and enduring walls that were the greatest of Roman engineering at the time. In the years that followed, this imposing structure would be the site of many notable events in Rome. Among these was the plot that raised Claudius to the position of emperor. He was brought there following the killing of his nephew, who was no longer supported by almost everyone in the top echelons of Roman authority. Claudius, who had expected to be slain due to his relationship with Caligula, learned once inside the barracks that he was being promoted to the position of Emperor of Rome, making him the first of many emperors to be installed by the Praetorians. Another odd event that occurred within the premises of this barracks was the building for the imperial title in 193 AD, following the assassination of the Emperor Pertinax. At the time, the troops were very agitated, prompting the statesman Titus Flavius to go there, seeking to calm tempers. But once inside, he realized that this was a good opportunity to seize power. Using his good oratory and remarkable negotiation skills, he began to offer donations to the troops in exchange for their support for his candidacy for the Roman throne. However, the situation became complicated when the statesman Didius Julianus arrived in the vicinity of the barracks and, despite being unable to enter, began to shout his offer to the guards. By the end of the negotiations, Titus Flavius had offered 20,000 sesterces for each soldier, whereas Didius had offered 25,000 sesterces. This made the latter the next emperor of Rome. However, the Praetorians' heyday ultimately ended. In 238, the barracks were violently attacked by Roman citizens during a revolt against Emperor Maximinus Thrax. A few decades later, these barracks were destroyed by order of Constantine I, who, after defeating the Praetorian Guard at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312, disbanded them. Despite this, the structures of Castra Praetoria survived for centuries. Even though 3 of the 4 sides of its walls were later incorporated into the Aurelian walls in 275, the barracks survived the test of time, serving today as the headquarters of Rome's National Central Library, and one of the most fantastic Roman buildings still standing. If you like learning more about the history of this incredible Praetorian Guard barracks, please like and subscribe to our channel.